music reflects the mood of the times, and I think the 1990s, because I listened to a lot of music from the 90s, and I think it was kind of formative in a way because I heard it a lot growing up, and so I can kind of understand and appreciate it more than most, maybe, in that it's sort of irreverent and cynical, and it's trying to stick a middle finger up to people who have expectations of you, so it's almost a bit infantile in a way, but at the same time, it was a reaction to the sort of unmoored optimism of the 80s, and then there was again a reaction to grunge, and things became again more optimistic. People started saying that grunge was kind of lame and we want more.
So this is the issue. I think defining our terms, music, is it popular music we're talking about, or is it music as a broad thing? Because I wouldn't say 80s was unbridled optimism. I wouldn't call post-punk,
at least the popular
new
music,
wave, new beat,
of course, not
necessarily optimistic.
And more on my side of things as well, you had the thrash metal and the black metal coming out of that, but at the same time you had that dichotomy between that and hair metal, which was much more positive. But then by the late 80s you get Motley Crue writing songs like Kickstart My Heart, which sound great but are about literally having a heart attack after ODing on heroin. Which isn't the most cheery of topics. But I would say within the popular culture of the early 90s, you did have that reaction against the hair music that had been dominant, and a lot of the more upbeat pop, synth pop that had been dominant throughout the 1980s, with grunge, with bands like Nirvana coming in, where the lyrics became much more self-reflective and honestly quite miserable. Kurt Cobain only ever wrote miserable songs. Much as I love them, Alice in Chains only ever wrote miserable songs. Pearl Jam's biggest hit was about a school kid walking into a school and shooting himself in front of all of his classmates. Great song, Jeremy, but you know, it's quite miserable, and the music video alongside it's quite miserable. And then you do have in the mid-90s, you've got, on one hand, you've got the Britpop, which is more upbeat, especially Oasis. Blur, kind of here and there, especially towards the later end of their career in the early 2000s, they did get very influenced, I would say, by grunge, especially from the self-titled album onwards. But then you also get nu metal, where you get bands like Korn who are very depressing. Oh, they've got big, hard-hitting songs, but the lyrical content is very depressing. Into the early 2000s, where bands like Linkin Park, all of their lyrics, as much as I love them, are woe is me style.
I suppose what I'm saying is it's difficult to generalise, and I guess this feeds into what the question is: what makes good music?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think that we all have our perceptions of what the music is, but obviously we haven't listened to all music created in all time, so you can't really feasibly have a perfect understanding of what the music is. But when I think that the sort of stereotypes shape how people perceive music, because it's kind of like a frame of reference for people to then pursue their own exploration of it. And the stereotype that I was getting at was that the 80s was quite upbeat and poppy. It is personally my least favourite era of music. At least,
oh, come on, there's some great music from the 80s.
I think from about the 50s to now, I feel like the 80s is I think actually the heavy metal that came out of the 80s is my favourite out of the lot, to be honest. I feel like the 90s was very good. The 60s and 70s were even better. But then the sort of 66 to 74 is the golden decade for me.
I suppose I probably, like Rory, find it quite difficult to pick a particular era.
I've spent a lot of time thinking about it.
It's the best, primarily because I tend to pick and choose music that I think is excellent from each of those eras. And even then, I can always go back and discover more great music.
The reason I put it in those terms is because someone once asked me a question that if you had to pick a decade, you don't have to have the start like 80 to 90, say, but if you had to pick 10 years of music, where would you pick it? And they were a fellow musician as well, so it was kind of an interesting question, because it's a means of identifying, well, where do your tastes kind of truly lie? If you were, say, stranded on a desert island and you could only listen to music within that decade, I don't know what circumstances that would happen, but I thought it was a good way of making you have to think about what music you think is most important to you, and kind of narrowing it down, rather than it actually being a useful way of looking at music per se.
I'd say right now is the best time for music, and that'll sound counterintuitive because I know there's a lot of rubbish about. And again, this is the problem,
especially pop music, right?
Popular music. But it's like every area of music is an iceberg. You got the stuff at the top, which defines that set period of years or whatever. Then you've got the depth of the depth of it underneath. At the moment, because of technology and the way streaming services and blah 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 has gone, you can create extremely cutting edge music. You have a degree of experimentation that's never been possible before. On the flip side of that, you can emulate psychedelic rock. You can authentically emulate any decade of music you like, and at the same time add a more modern twist onto it if that's what you're going for. And because because artists aren't directly dictated by major labels anymore and by managers, I feel there's a greater degree of availability for creativity and for individual direction and actual authentic expression within music that hasn't been available in all prior decades, basically.
This is exactly what we touched on in the Contemplations, where we talked about whether modern music has gotten worse. I can't remember the exact premise of it, but that's the gist. And I think we were both in agreement that actually, no, it's the best time to listen to music, which is actually nice because there are very few things you can say, it's the best time in history. Well, maybe if you get ill, I'd say it's probably the best time.
Well, sorry, when you say this, do you mean the best time to listen to music or the best time?
Best time to be a music listener, because you've got all of this technology and the things available.
I'd say a creator as well.
As a creator as well, yeah. I was going to get onto that.
It's very difficult to make money from your music, but I do suppose it's easier than it was before to get a large audience for your music purely because you're not entirely reliant on the big music labels getting your music out there. Also, I do think that we tend to look back on previous decades of music with rose-tinted glasses, primarily because the people of our age, one, we didn't live through them, and two, we're at the point in time now where the cream of the crop has been allowed to filter through, where most of the stuff that we remember from those periods is the excellent music. That's what people remember those eras for, and we don't have to sit through the 1970s having to listen to awful Osmond songs on the radio 24/7.
Okay, I want to say something about this because it seems to me that there is something that I completely disagree with here. That for me, it's not so much about experimentation. If you start caring about experimentation, you just don't care about, if that's your primary concern, it seems to me that you don't care about making it good music.
This is the AC/DC listener in you coming out, isn't it?
Yeah, I love AC/DC.
No, I respect that.
I love AC/DC, and I've watched them live. And
I need to.
Yeah, okay. No, but what I want to say is that at the end of the day, it's all about the music. It's not about sounding different, or it's about do you create something good?
Yes.
And one thing is
all
that
about the execution.
You say that it's easier now, or to be a creator, but I think that this may be the other way around, because this ease with which a musical, let's say, composer can go on a board and find some, programs and say, I'll use this or that sound, this ambience. It seems to me that, the fact that it is made more easy takes a lot of the anguish and pain that you expect from artists to be formed from.
I think you're romanticizing it too much.
Why?
Firstly, on the experimentation point, I'm not saying that experimentation equals good. However, in that vein, progressivism is experimentation. I'm not saying that's a good thing. However, there is progress in music. There's objective progress from the 1950s to now. That's a good thing because we've got this whole scale. We've got this whole spectrum of music that's come out of it. Secondly, yes, because the musical creation process has essentially been democratized, you're going to get a lot of crap from that, but at the same time you're going to get a lot of extremely good music.
Okay, but with the extremely good music, can it top the extremely good music of the 18th century?
That's subjective.
I would say absolutely yes.
Okay,
that's subjective.
Here is where we may disagree, but it's a taste thing.
I am a fan of a lot of more recent music from the past 10, 15 years that I think easily could stand up against any of the classics that people romanticize. And this is coming from somebody who does really love the music of yesteryear as well.
And it's also, why do you think a certain piece of music is timeless? Do you think Freebird by Leonard Skinner is an amazing song because it's an amazing song, which it is, by the way.
It is.
Or is it because you associate it with driving down a motorway at 120 miles an hour?
I don't
like it
see the
because it's a
dilemma.
5-minute guitar solo.
No, but you know,
Too
I
much
don't see
guitar
the-
solo.
certain songs and certain sounds that get ascribed to an aesthetic or a certain time period. You know, like Danger Zone. Top
Personally,
Gun,
I
blah,
prefer
blah.
the 15-minute live version where the solo goes on for an extra 5 minutes.
We do need to get onto the solo question because
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed that segment from Contemplations, my series. And if you want to watch the full conversation, which that was taken from, all you need to do is sign up to our website for £5 a month and you can watch all of the content we have there. Thank you very much for watching and goodbye.